Okay, dann fange ich mal an. Es ist 10 Uhr. Herzlichen guten Morgen an diesem 18. Juni. Mein Name ist Juliana Pranke. Ich bin beim DBV angestellt als Referentin für internationale Kooperation und moderiere hier heute durch diese Veranstaltung unsere Online-Seminarreihe Bibliotheken als Orte für Demokratiestärkung, heute die 5. Ausgabe schon. Organisiert und durchgeführt vom Kompetenzennetzwerk für Bibliotheken. Ich erkläre ganz kurz noch auf Deutsch, wie das mit den Untertiteln funktioniert und würde dann ins Englische wechseln. Und für die Untertitel teile ich auch einmal kurz meinen Bildschirm. Und zwar, Sie sollten jetzt was sehen. Sieht irgendjemand irgendwas? Ja, okay. Genau, für die Untertitel. Entweder sehen Sie in der unteren Menüleiste schon dieses CC-Zeichen oder wenn Sie das noch nicht sehen, gehen Sie bitte einmal auf die 3 Punkte, unter denen mehr stehen, klicken dort drauf und dann sollte sich ein Menü öffnen, das so oder so ähnlich aussieht, also Untertitel und Übersetzung. Hier würden Sie einmal sozusagen den Schieberegler so verschieben, dass Übersetzung eingeschaltet ist. Und dann gibt es nochmal ein Auswahlmenü, wo Sie die Sprache einstellen können, in die übersetzt werden soll, also vermutlich Deutsch. Genau, ich hoffe, es klappt bei allen, sonst melden Sie sich einfach nochmal. Okay, so today we have Maija Treile from the National Library of Latvia with us. She's the head of the Interpretation and Information Center, I think. No, not quite. Okay, Maija, maybe you correct me later on when you start. And the special thing about this webinar is that I'm very happy that we have a representative of our current partner country here, because as you maybe also know, BED chooses a new partner country every 3 years, and since last summer, it's Latvia. The partner country initiative is or has been established to promote and foster and encourage professional exchange between German librarians and Latvian, in this case, Latvian librarians, to establish cooperations also. Yes, so if you want to know more about the partner country initiative, I invite you to go to the website of BEE. That's the International Commission of BED. And there's a subsite that's called Partnerland. You can also, if you want to, subscribe to a mailing list, or if you want to get even more involved or just, listen in for the first time, we have a working group, a small group that meets once a month. On Fridays, actually it's this Friday, tomorrow we have our regular meeting again at 10 o'clock. We meet digitally and discuss, ways to fill the partner country initiative with life, basically. And with this, I will stop the screen sharing. And just one reminder, we are recording the session, so there will be a video recording available after on the website of the DBV. I always send an email to everybody who has registered for this webinar afterwards with the link, so you can look at it again if you want to, or recommend it to other people. Yes, and with this, I hand over to Maija and yes, invite you to tell us more about the Rigaer Reading Manifesto and everything that you have planned or already done with it.
So, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Juliana, for your kind introduction. I'll start by sharing my screen, I guess. So, can you see it? Good enough. Yes, full screen. Yes, okay, that's great. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And it's really a real pleasure to be here, and especially within this framework of partner country initiative Julian already mentioned. And before we move to the Riga Manifesto and the topic of reading and democracy, let me briefly introduce the institution behind this story. And this is the National Library of Latvia. It's often called the Castle of Light. And like many national libraries, we are responsible for preserving the national published heritage and providing access. But our work extends beyond collections, and we are also a research institution, an exhibition venue. We are a cultural center and a platform for public dialogue. We organize conferences, educational programs, public discussions, and initiate and facilitate conversations about cultural and educational policy. And the story I'm going to tell today emerged at the intersection of all these activities. And this is where I come in, and my own perspective combines several roles. I'm a researcher of today's reading practices, interested in how people read and how reading habits are changing today. And I'm also a curator. Over the years, I have worked on exhibitions, public programs, and participatory formats that bring different experiences and perspectives into dialogue. And since 2022, I have been leading the Research and Interpretation Center at the National Library of Latvia. And it was one of the, I was also one of the authors of the Riga Manifesto, together with the director of the National Library of Latvia, Dagnija Baltiņa. And the manifesto was also shaped through a broader collaborative process involving a diverse working group. This is something I will return to later in the presentation. But looking back, I realized that the story I'm going to share grow precisely at the intersection of these roles: research, curation, public dialogue, and policy. Let me briefly outline where we are going. I would like to start with the relationship between democracy and reading itself. Then I will introduce the Riga Manifesto and explain why we felt a manifesto was needed at this particular moment. And after that, I will focus on participation and dialogue, whose voices were included and how we tried to create space for different reading experiences. And I will then look at how these conversations moved beyond the manifesto and began to inform discussions about a national reading strategy in Latvia. And I will also introduce a reading laboratory, an ongoing participatory format through which we explore contemporary reading experiences together with readers themselves. And I will conclude with a few reflections that may be relevant beyond the Latvian context. So, before talking about the manifesto itself, I would like to answer a more fundamental question: why reading? Why should libraries talk about reading and democracy at the same sentence? And for us, the answer emerged gradually through several years of work, through research into the history of books and reading, as well as studies of contemporary reading habits. We came to view reading through, this slide, through three interconnected perspectives: the past, the present, and the future. This may sound a rather simple framework, but it emerged from a somewhat unusual institutional position. because at the National Library of Latvia, research into the history of books and reading is closely connected with research into contemporary reading practices. And while both inform public programs, reading promotion initiatives, and policy discussions. And this gave us a rare opportunity to think about the reading across different time horizons at once, as a historical phenomenon, a contemporary practice, and a question about the future we want to build. And looking at the past, we see how reading has played an important role in participation in society and contributed to the development of democratic culture. And looking at the present, we observe rapid changes in reading habits and media environments. But looking towards the future, we become increasingly convinced that democracy depends on citizens who can think critically, navigate complexity, and engage with perspectives beyond their own. And one important source of this thinking was the program 500 Years of Latvian Books. And between 2021 and 2025, Latvia marked 5 centuries since the publication of the first non-printed text in Latvian, first printed book in Latvian. Initiated and led by the National Library of Latvia, the program brought together historical research, exhibitions, conferences, publications, educational activities, and so on across Latvia and beyond. And for us, it became much more than a historical anniversary. It was an opportunity to reflect on the role that books, reading, and literacy have played in shaping Latvian society. And again, we encountered the same pattern. Reading was closely connected with education, social mobility, civic participation, cultural self-awareness, and ultimately the development of a democratic state. And in other words, history reminded us that reading has never been merely a private activity. It has always been connected to the ways people participate in society and contribute to the shaping the future of their communities. One of the central projects of the 500 Years of Latvian Books program was the exhibition Is a Library a Birthright, curated by me and my colleague, book and reading historian Pauls Dāja. And looking back, this exhibition became both the intellectual and emotional starting point of the Rigaer Manifesto. The exhibition also recently was recognized with the Latvian Museum Award for museum education, which is something we are very happy and grateful for. And the jury particularly highlighted its ability to connect historical research with contemporary sociological perspectives on reading and libraries. And this exhibition was inspired by the 500th anniversary of Bibliotheca Rigensis, or the Riga Library, the first public library in Riga. And through this historical story, however, we became interested in a broader and more philosophical idea. One we borrowed from Jorge Luis Borges and his vision of a library as a model of the universe in his story, The Library of Babel. And we decided to experiment with this idea and build our own model of the world through the exhibition. And the building blocks of this model came both from historical research and from research on contemporary reading habits. Yet the history of Bibliotheca Rigensis also reminded us that libraries have not always been as open and inclusive as we would like to imagine today. Also, the library was founded in 1524 with the ambition of making books available to the citizens of Riga. The centuries' access remained limited to a relatively small and privileged part of society, educated, wealthy, predominantly German-speaking men. And in this sense, the history of libraries is not only a story of access, it is also a story of exclusion. And as librarians, I think it is really, really important for us to acknowledge these more complicated historical roots. The democratic library is not something that simply exists. It's something that has to be created and recreated in each generation. And most of Bibliotheca Rigensis was destroyed during the bombing of Riga in 1941 during the World Second War. And what survives today does not largely because a small group of library workers, women and men, librarians and support staff, who save the most valuable books. And the history of libraries is ultimately a history of people. And this brought us back to a set surprisingly simple questions. Questions that remain relevant whether we look at the past, the present, or the future. And these questions are: who can read? What can they read? Can they actually access books and knowledge? And these have never been purely cultural questions. They have always been social and political questions as well, and therefore deeply connected with democracy. Our exhibition combined conceptual questions with empirical research. Alongside research into the history of books and reading, we conducted a national representative survey on reading habits among adults in Latvia aged 18 to 75. And we also carried out in-depth interviews with young people aged 13 to 22, which is a generation whose reading practices are often at the center of public debate. And these studies allowed us to connect historical perspectives with contemporary realities. And their findings became an important layer of the exhibition narrative and later informed the development of the Rigaer Manifesto. And they helped us discuss reading on the basis of evidence rather than assumption, nostalgia, or some fears about the decline of reading. While our own research and public programs provided one important foundation, another source of inspiration came from the international discussion around high-level reading. In 2023, the Ljubljana Reading Manifesto brought renewed attention to the importance of deep, reflective reading in contemporary society. And the manifesto was developed by an international group of scholars and launched at the Frankfurt Book Fair, bringing the question of reading to a much wider international audience. And it argues that higher level reading is essential for critical thinking, empathy, and the ability to engage with complexity. And again, these are not only educational or cultural values, they are also qualities that democratic societies depend on. And as the Ljubljana Reading Manifesto reminds us through a much quoted warning by one of its supporters, the Canadian writer Margaret Atwood, if there are no young readers and writers, there will soon be no older ones. Literacy will die and democracy will die too. In many ways, the Ljubljana Manifesto helped us to articulate something we had already begun to observe through our own research and public work. And I mean, Reading is closely connected to how people make sense of complexity, encounter other perspectives, and participate in public life. And in that sense, it forms part of the infrastructure of democracy. But once we accepted this idea, another question emerged. What exactly we are defending when we speak about the right to read? And the answer is not as simply as it might seem, because reading is not a neutral or uncontested concept. Some researchers and practitioners emphasize higher-level reading, long-form texts, and critical thinking, while others focus on accessibility, inclusion, and the right to access information in formats that meet different needs. But we realized that these perspectives were not enemies. Rather, they represented different but equally important dimensions of the right to read. And the Rigaer Manifesto emerged from an attempt to bring these perspectives together rather than choose between them. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to write a manifesto. At a certain point, we realized that the research alone was not enough. We had historical research, we had studies of contemporary reading habits, we had an exhibition that opened a public dialogue, and we had an international discussion about higher level reading and democracy. Yet many of these conversations remained fragmented, and different sectors were often discussing similar concerns, but not necessarily together. And we felt there was a need for a shared language, a way to articulate why reading matters not only for individual development, but also for society as a whole. And at the same time, as the program 500 Years of Latvian Books was coming to an end, we found ourselves asking this simple question: what will we leave for the next 500 years? And a manifesto seemed like the right format. Not because we believed that we have all the answers, but because we wanted to formulate a shared position and invite others into these conversations. In other words, the manifesto was not intended as an end point, it was intended as a starting point for broader cooperation and future policy development. To launch this conversation, during the Riga Book Fair, we organized an international symposium called the Right to Read, the Rigaer Manifesto. It was in October 2025, so at the end of the last year. And the symposium brought together researchers, librarians, educators, policymakers, and representatives of the book sector, but also voices that are not usually part of reading policy discussions. But we will come back to some of those perspectives later. And most important, it marked the public launch of the Rigaer Manifesto. But now let's turn to the content of the manifesto itself. It outlines a number of principles that we believe should guide future decisions and policies. The first concerns the relationship between reading, language, and identity. In Latvia, reading in Latvian is a condition for the long-term vitality of the language and cultural continuity and democratic self-determination. This becomes particularly important at a time when English increasingly dominates global communication. And knowledge production and media environments creating a new challenge for the long-term vitality of smaller languages as Latvian. And the second principle is accessibility. Throughout this presentation, I have spoken about the right to read, and for us, this right belongs to everyone, regardless of age, social background, disability, or reading ability. And this includes members of the Latvian diaspora, people with different learning and reading needs, and people whose access to reading may be limited by disability, geography, social or economic circumstances. And libraries play a particularly important role here because they remain one of the most accessible public institutions offering free access to reading, knowledge, and culture. The third principle concerns high-level reading. And it's inspired in part by the Rigaer Manifesto. And we argue that democratic societies need citizens who can engage with complex text. Texts reflect critically, understand different perspectives, and navigate complexity. And from this perspective, higher level reading is not simply one skill among many. It is a practice through which these capacities are continuously exercised and strengthened. And the manifesto also makes two broader arguments about the role of reading in contemporary society. The first concerns democratic resilience, and this is particularly relevant in Latvia. We live next to a country that is waging a full-scale war against Ukraine. And in recent years, we have felt growing tensions in Latvia as well, including security incidents that have made the reality of the war feel physically closer than before. Yet the most persistent battles are not fought in our airspace, but in the information space. And disinformation, propaganda, and various formats of information manipulation have become a constant part of environment in which democratic societies operate. And in such circumstances, the ability to evaluate sources, recognize manipulations, understand context, and engage with complexity becomes increasingly important. And this is one of the reasons why the manifesto links reading with democratic resilience and security. The second argument concerns human development, and our reading supports learning, creativity, innovation, and participation in public life. And this is why the manifesto argues for a human-centered digital future, one in which technological development strengthens rather than weakens our capacity for reading, thinking, and understanding. And taken together, these principles reflect a simple conviction. Reading contributes not only to individual development, but also to the resilience and long-term health of democratic societies. If this is true, then the conversation about reading cannot remain limited to researchers, librarians, or policymakers alone. And it needs to include the people whose lives and experience it seeks to understand. And when we started thinking about participation, we realized that conversations about reading are often dominated by professionals speaking to other professionals, and we wanted to broaden that conversation. And one way of doing this was the Reading Diversity stage at the Right to Read symposium, where we invited people whose experience of reading were very different but equally important. We invited people from very different backgrounds. Some well known in Latvian public life, others less visible but not less important. In a series of short TED-style talks, they shared their own perspectives on reading and its role in society. And together, these talks explored questions such as what does reading mean for statehood and democracy? What does it mean for security and resilience? What role does it play in family life, in the workplace, in the diaspora, or in the age of artificial intelligence? And we deliberately invited voices that are not always present in discussions about reading policy. For example, one of talk focused on accessibility and neurodiversity, and it combined professional expertise with personal experience and was delivered by the head of the Latvian Autism Association, reflecting on her journey as the mother of an autistic son. Another explored reading and artificial intelligence together with the director of Latvia's National Artificial Intelligence Center. We also invited father and daughter who spoke about reading not only as individual activity, but as a way of being together, sharing stories and creating connections across generations. And we heard from the editor-in-chief of Latvia's leading weekly magazine, who spoke about the relationships between reading, critical thinking, and the quality of public debate. And the goal of this reading diversity stage was not to reach agreement on every issue. The goal was to make visible the many different ways in which reading matters in contemporary society. And we believed that bringing these voices together had value in itself. Not because they would all arrive at the same conclusion, but because each perspective could illuminate the others. And in many ways, it is the space between different voices and experiences that forms the basis of democratic dialogue. But the reading diversity stage was not a standalone event. The manifesto was also informed by a broader collaborative process. The initiative was developed and coordinated by the National Library of Latvia, which guided the manifesto from the first draft to its final version. But before it was publicly launched, the draft was reviewed and discussed by a working group that brought together representatives from many different sectors. All speakers of the reading diversity stage were also members of this working group, creating a direct link between the development of the manifesto and the public conversation. And the group also included a more institutional layer of stakeholders: publishers, libraries, educators, blind language specialists, diaspora organizations, ministries, the National Artificial Intelligence Center, UNESCO, and others. And this diversity was important because the manifesto was never intended to be a library document. If we wanted to contribute to public policy discussions, it needed to be informed by people working in different fields and representing different interests. And the working group helped us refine the text and broaden its perspective before the manifesto was published. And we also wanted to extend the conversation beyond the symposium and the working group, of course. And for that reason, we published the manifesto on manabals.lv. This is literally my voice. It's Latvia's best known civic participation platform. And people are accustomed to encountering proposals for social and political change there. So placing a reading manifesto on the platform was in itself an interesting choice. And we were interested to see whether the conversation about reading would resonate beyond the communities that had already been involved. And at the same time, the platform provided a simple and visible way for people to express their support and become part of the initiative. And in total, the manifesto received more than 800 signatures. And one indication that the manifesto touched on broader questions was the response it received beyond Latvia. And a few days after the symposium, the German newspaper Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung published a commentary by Friedrich Kuchenmann discussing the Rigaer Manifesto. And what mattered to me was not that he wrote about Latvia, although it was not pretend that we didn't enjoy that attention, but the most important was that it was he treated the manifesto not as a specifically Latvian story, but as a part of a broader European discussion about reading, democracy, and social resilience. And the Ljubljana Reading Manifesto emerged from similar concerns and, as I already mentioned, was an important source of inspiration for the Riga Manifesto. But more recently, these ideas have continued to evolve across different national contexts. Slovenia has also developed a national reading manifesto, and the Latvian experience became one of the reference points in that process. In other words, the questions raised in Riga turned out to be larger than Latvia alone. And one important point is that the manifesto didn't end with the manifesto. Already in the text, we called for the development of a national reading strategy, and we were very aware that some challenges cannot be addressed through public discussion alone. If we want long-term and systematic change, reading also needs to be reflected in policy documents, institutional priorities, and also funding frameworks. And the National Library of Latvia has taken a coordinating role in this process with support from both the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Education and Science. And we see ourselves as a relatively neutral actor, one that can bring together different sectors, institutions, and perspectives around a shared goal. And the process is still ongoing, but the manifesto helped create a common point of a reference for these discussions. One encouraging development is that there is now a shared willingness to discuss reading at the level of long-term policy and strategy. And this photography was taken during a meeting at the Ministry of Education and Science late last year. And the ministries were already involved in the development of the manifesto through the working group, which meant that many of these conversations had already begun during the drafting process. And rather, they represent the next step in a process that has been developed gradually through research, public dialogue, the manifesto, and the partnership that emerged around it. So I can say that in many ways, policy work is built like step by step. At the same time, policy processes are rarely straightforward. And since this meeting took place, Latvia's government has resigned, and both the Minister of Education and Science and the Minister of Culture have changed. And with parliamentary elections approach this autumn, further political changes are likely. And as a result, some parts of the strategy process are currently moving more slowly than we had originally hoped. And this is one of the realities of policy work. And the reading strategies require long-term commitment. And with political leadership, while political leadership can change very quickly. And but reading culture are built over decades, not electoral cycles, as we know. As I'm gradually approaching the end of this presentation, there is one final initiative I would like to introduce, the Reading Laboratory. And the idea emerged from a sense that something was still missing. We had already conducted surveys, interviews, and various forms of public dialogue about reading. And yet our curiosity remained, and we wanted to better understand the lived experience of reading. Not only how people read, but how reading becomes woven into everyday life. And we wanted to create a space where people could think about reading together, exchange experiences, learn from one another, and formulate their own ideas about what reading means today. And in many ways, the Reading Laboratory sits somewhere between research, dialogue, co-creation, and community of practice. And we currently work with two groups of participants. And the youngest participant in those groups is 19 years old, and the oldest is 83 years old. And bringing together people from such different generations and life experiences has become one of the most valuable aspects of the process. And we do not see those reading labs as traditional focus groups. Rather, it's a space where readers and researchers think together about reading and where new questions emerge through conversation. And let me give just one example. During one session, participants were invited to bring a childhood book that they felt had influenced them in some lasting way. And everyone in the room took part in the exercise, including the researchers and organizers. And one by one, we shared our books and reflected on where we had encountered them, what place they had occupied in our family libraries, how they had influenced us, and whether we would still recommend them today for our friends or for our children. And what began as a conversation about books gradually became a conversation about family histories, school experiences, social changes, memory, and identity. And one particularly interesting observation emerged from these discussions, because many participants who grew up in the 1990s, including me, brought books that had originally belonged to their parents' generation. And in the Latvian context, this often meant books published in the 1960s and 1970s during the Soviet occupation period. And looking back, we realized that many of these books contained ideological message that we barely noticed as children. And at the time, they simply formed part of our reading environment. And this reminded us that books can travel across historical periods and political systems, and often acquiring new meanings in the process. And it's good if there is somebody who well, like a parent or a librarian or a teacher who can give this context in such cases. And from there, the discussion shifted from particular books to the experience of being a reader. And participants worked in also, this is more about this format, participants worked in smaller groups, exploring what they felt they had lost from their childhood reading experience, what they have preserved or gained as readers since childhood, and formulated recommendations based on their experience. But those reading labs are not only about reading, they are also about dialogue. And over the years, through research, exhibitions, public programs, and participatory projects, we have become increasingly interested in the conditions that make meaningful dialogue possible. And we know from experience that simply bringing people together in a room does not automatically create mutual understanding or equal participation. And this is why the reading labs follows a carefully designed methodology. And we were inspired by several approaches, including the work of the Finnish researcher of philosophy and director of Dialogue Academy, Kay Alhanen, and other dialogue-based practices developed in Finland. And we also draw on facilitation methods used in other communities where equal participation, attentive listening, and speaking from person experience play an important role. And the aim is not to debate, persuade, or even reach consensus. The aim is to deepen this understanding. And participants speak from their own experience. They are asked not to interrupt, evaluate, or immediately respond to what others have said. And everyone is given time and space to contribute. And these principles apply to everyone in the room. Researchers and facilitators also participate in the exercises and share their own experiences. And listening is treated as seriously as speaking. In some sessions, participants read texts aloud, while others simply listen. Only afterwards do we begin reflecting together on what was heard and experienced. And for us, this is not, of course, only a method for exploring reading. It's also a small exercise in democratic culture, creating a space where different experiences can coexist, where curiosity is valued, and where understanding is considered more important than agreement. Looking back, I do not think that the most important lesson is that every country should write a reading manifesto. The manifesto itself is only one possible tool. What matters more is the process behind it. And for me, this project reinforced 4 ideas about the role libraries can play in democratic societies. Libraries can bring together people who would not normally meet. Libraries can create spaces where dialogue becomes possible. And libraries can help translate these conversations into longer-term public discussions and policy processes. And none of these provides quick solutions. But if we think democracy itself is not built through quick solutions. It is built through the patient work of creating connections, understanding, and trust. And this is where libraries still have something important to contribute. That's what I really believe. So, thank you very much for your attention. I would be very interested to hear maybe something from your experience. I'm still interested in this question, how libraries can create meaningful dialogue in those increasingly fragmented societies. I believe you also have some good examples, but also I would be happy also to answer some questions if you have some. So, vielen Dank.
Thank you, Maija, for this very interesting presentation. I thought there were so many also quite creative and interesting approaches and ideas in there. I really liked the diversity reading stage and also the reading labs. And probably without knowing, you made a nice curve to our last webinar edition where we had somebody from the Finnish timeout method here with us. So it was nice to see that you also work with, Finnish input and focus on these ideas of facilitating dialogue. Yeah, great. So questions, comments from the audience, you can write in the chat or just raise your hand and speak as you wish. You can also write questions in German or ask them in German, and we will translate them together. Don't be shy now. Okay, then I start. Maija, you said that 847 people had signed the manifesto so far. And 10,000 is a big number, but maybe not because Latvia is not, I mean, it's smaller than Germany population-wise, but do you still see people signing up now? I mean, the manifesto came out in October, but is there like a consistent signature activity?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, I still do, but as I said, that like this manifesto is not like an end point, and I look at it more like an instrument for in this process, and people are still signing it, but of course we have to understand that this connection between like reading, higher level reading or accessibility of reading and all the sectors of our life, it's not so easily to see as, for example, when people feel like I don't know, when they sign something about taxis or Istanbul Convention, for example. We had this example recently also when politicians wanted to cancel our being part in this. And that's why we have to work like in many levels. And on the one hand, it's not like very many. On the other hand, it's already 800. And if we would ask them to sign in some other platform, maybe it would wouldn't there isn't like this 10,000 count. Then it would seems like. In a way a bit better even. But if we look back to this, for example, Ljubljana Manifesto, it was also signed by a bit more than 1,000 people. So we are somewhere in the same line.
Yeah, thank you. Olaf Hamann.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, or good morning. Hard to say, 11 o'clock. Okay, thank you very much, Maija. It was very interesting to listen to your explanations. My question is regarding the library policy itself. Did the manifesto have has had any influence on acquisition policy or in the libraries? You underline that you want multi-language offers for the readers. You have a great Russian community in your country. How does it influence acquisition policies, especially in public libraries?
Thank you for your question. Could you a bit maybe formulate this? What kind of policies in public libraries? Maybe I lost a bit in translation.
Collection building policy.
Collection building policies.
Yes, acquisition. How do you
Okay,
acquire
okay,
new books?
Yes.
So you
Yes.
spoke about the situation according Russian language literature and the
mhm.
content of this
Mhm.
kind of imperial content, I would say. So think about the big Soviet Union and not only about your small countries and so on, your small cultures. But did it influence the collection building in the public libraries in the past? I think for the past year.
In the recent year, you mean, like
in the whole period, you can. There has been a discussion for this manifesto beforehand before you published it. So it is a process not of a half a year, but probably of 2-3 years minimum.
I guess for us as a national library, we have this obligatory example, and so we collect everything without choosing. And this is like a really important role of library, not to censorship anything and so on. About the impact of manifesto to some collections strategies, I would say that it's too early to talk about this, but maybe the most important like sectors would be how to make books more accessible in Latvian diaspora or Latvian people living outside Latvia, because we have a lot of people living abroad, and for they this connection with Latvia via this reading process and Latvian book reading process is very important, and this is where really important role plays our we have every year we have this reading jury for children, youth, and adults, and a lot of people from diaspora also participated, and then they receive those books collections, and then they can read them. But it's still kind of challenge, especially for like smaller communities, because we have like big Latvian communities in UK or Ireland, but maybe there is only one family in New Zealand. We know those examples, and it's really hard to be connected with Latvia. About those Soviet occupation period books, these are books in they are not in Russian, which I mentioned. They are mostly which we read as children. They were translated into Latvian, and they are still we took them to this reading lab from our bookshelves, so we still have them in our homes, but I wouldn't suggest to read it, for example, to my daughter, and it's good to know, because usually they are like a really nice story, nice, understandable for children, but there is also this other level where is this propaganda, and if you we can't like cancel this our history, but it's important that we have like new books and new stories, and if we have something like this, it's important that we can reflect on them, and we can tell our children what kind of books these were, and maybe some characters were our even famous characters in childhood, but now we have grown up, and now we can see all that picture. So it's always like a very complex question, I would say. So I hope I answered in a way your question.
There's also a comment by Victoria to you, Olaf, in the chat. And we have a We have another question in the chat by Henrike Hillen. She writes, thank you very much for this interesting and inspiring lecture. You talked a lot about research. Can you tell us which sources you used and where that research can be found?
So, yes, I talked about research, and there are two parts. There is, if we talk about this research of history and also this research of today's reading habits. If we talk about histories, and there are a lot of sources which were on our table if we speak about this the Riga City Library, or if we speak about reading history, and those publications we have our as I told, I am part of this research and interpretation center, and we have researchers in-house, and they publish regularly some publications on different topics, and we have also some issues, especially about reading history. For example, reading pandemics, which was it's a title, and as we can understand from this title, it was published during COVID pandemics, and it was about reading history and reading spaces in Latvia, and it was published in 2020. And also we have our proceedings, which can be found also in a digital format and so on. And if we talk about those today's reading habits, then we made this survey, and there was a report, and it is also digitally published, but it's only in Latvian. Of course, nowadays we can use those machine translation tools to understand what is it about. So yes, there is this.
Yeah, maybe you can share a link to that survey, I think, or the survey report. I think that would be nice. And yeah, we can try some
Okay. I'll try to
translation machines.
find it.
You don't have to do it right now. You can send it to me later. Okay. I was wondering, the reading labs, I mean, it didn't sound like a super complicated concept, but still, I think it was very nice the way that you described it. And I'm also sure that lots of German libraries do something similar. Nevertheless, I'm wondering, is there like a manual? I mean, when you promote the reading lab throughout Latvia, you probably need to explain to the libraries outside Riga how they're supposed to do this reading lab. Is this something did you write this down, and could we have the document and translate it in German?
Thank you for the question. Now, I guess this could be the next step we could do, because we started to organize them really recently. The first lab was in March, so a few months ago. And yes, it's really like a really simple concept, but that's why I really enjoy it. It's something for my heart also, where I can feel that I belong to this crowd of people, and it works in as I mentioned, we have two groups, and it works in all of them, and we want to like start organize other groups, maybe to make this participation even more more diverse presence of society. But this is something what we do here. But maybe this was, I guess this was the first presentation where I talked more about this in public, actually. And I have such ideas that we could make some kind of manual, maybe, or some like report of our experience, which could be used by other libraries. And your question also like gives this message that it could be a good way how to
Yeah, I think so.
further. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, Victoria is doing all our marketing for us. Thank you. So there's also a link now in the chat to the German translation of the Rigaer Reading Manifesto. And I will also later on, when I send the video recording, I will also put in that article in the FAZ of Fridtjof Küchenmann. It's behind the paywall, but yeah, I'll include that so you can also have a look at that. And then there's another question by Sylvia Kroll. Thank you very much, Maija. Could you please explain the same possibilities, how you motivate more people for reading books and educate themselves, especially people who mostly educate over social media?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. So do you have an approach for people who, are on the opposite spectrum of high level reading, who basically only read, super short social media texts?
Yes, thank you for the question. This is like really important topic, and one of things which is also mentioned in our manifesto is to make like our public spaces more bookish. I would say that there would be more books, but nice books, because typical situation, for example, in Latvian cafe is that there is a kind of a bookshelf for everyone, but there are those old books which nobody wants to read, and this is like this is actually very sad view. And we also these of course these are like some initiatives which are not for I haven't such a power to make something for all the country or something like that. But for example, very popular in Latvia is this the night of museums in May, when one can walk around and visiting all the museums, and also library participate in this. And what we have done this year and the year before, we made we have a very nice building, and at the very top there is a very good view to the old city, and really nice venue. And we made there like ambient reading room which was like really nice. There was a DJ who played an ambient music, and there was lightning, and there was a like really good collection of books for various audiences. And usually in this museum night, there really participate people who are not like our everyday readers or everyday visitors to museums or libraries. So these are people who maybe they came for the first time, and when they see something like that, then it's interesting to take something to take this book in your hands and to start. And I wouldn't say that of course everyone who came there, then they walked away and they became like book persons. That would be too optimistic. But like step by step, we can show that there are like many really interesting ways how we can read, and it's not only about this content, which is of course very interesting, but it's also about quality of our life, and it's getting more and more popular to do something by your hands and to be like present in this life, not only in this screen life. And this is I guess this is like this tendency where we who advocate books reading can come in and talk about this experience, also about this that we can smell books and things, we can like touch them and all those things. Little nice.
Okay, so we need ambient DJs for the night of the libraries. We have a night of libraries coming up. Well, not coming up, it's next year, but yeah. Okay. Do we have more questions? I see that people are already dropping out, but last call for questions. If not, then thank you very much, Maija, for this presentation and for answering all our questions. Good luck with your continued work. And yes, so once again, those of you who were there last time and saw the presentation on the Finnish timeout method, you can still get back to me if you are interested in joining a training in the second half of the year for this method. Send me an email, call me, let me know. We will take a summer break now with this webinar series, so there will be no webinar in July and August, but we hopefully will start again in September. I have reached out to colleagues in Hungary and Romania, so yeah, it will be hopefully one of those two countries to present in the next webinar and speak about their democracy work. So I think it will be very interesting. Yeah, so that's it for today. Thank you for being here. I will be in touch with the information of the recording and everything else. Have a nice day.
Yes, thank you very much for organizing all this.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye, Victoria.